and he took me away. So I didn't see what had happened. Usually I knew what was happening. Now Deepa invited me to Toronto to see the rough edit of the film. And suddenly I see this train coming in, and inside it there are all these dead bodies. There are somebody's hand here, somebody's leg here, somebody's eyes floating, flies floating around the eyes, people are sitting on the top, people are sitting underneath. It's a big jhamela. And there's blood and gore, and it's a frightening scene. And I said, Deepa, what is all this? Are these dummies? And she said, Mamsi, she was very offended. I spent 8 hours making these people up, putting on makeup, putting them one on top of the other, putting one person's hand here, one person's leg there, doing them all very well. And when it was all ready, after 8 hours, one man says, "Oh, ji, main peshab lagi hai." You know what that means? I'll translate. Somebody says, "I want to pee." So Deepa says, "Khabardar, don't you dare move." So the fellow, he wore it up for a little while. And after a little while, he says, "Ji, main jana hai, I had to go." She says, "Oh, please, beta, go where you are." And now the people under him said, "You go on us and see what we do to you." And she was telling me this story, and I thought it was quite, funny, and I forgot to find out what happened in the end of it. But there were a lot of interesting episodes as such. Now there was another very interesting thing. I was about 8 years old when the partition took place. And I grew up hearing stories. My aunt and my mother and other women would be talking, puss, 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 very, so that we children could not hear. And they were, as I grew up, I realized they were talking about kidnapped women. Somebody's sister-in-law, somebody's mother, somebody's daughter, they were talking about these. And that was mainly my reason for writing this story. Because I said, one has to know what happened to these women. Hundreds of thousands of women were kidnapped at that time. Muslim women by Hindus and Sikh and Hindu women by Muslims. And then they were brutalized, raped. And the very sad thing is it's a question of honor. So that when the women were, after the partition happened, and they were recovered from various villages, when there used to be social working women, and they would go from village to village, and people would say, there's a woman in that village who doesn't belong there. They would know what was happening. And so they would rescue the woman. And they would bring her back, and right next door to our house, where there were used to be Hindu and Sikh neighbors, there were suddenly bedraggled Muslims who had taken over. This was Lahore. And their servants' quarters had been turned into what we children, my brother and I, thought was a woman's jail. It was really where the recovered women were brought to a camp to be repatriated to their homes. But because their honor had been sullied, very often they were not accepted back into their families. And they were just given sewing machines and learned to make a living and turned into prostitutes mainly. So these were some of the stories that I heard. Now, one day when I was walking with my Mali, as a child I had polio and I didn't go to school, so I very liked tuition. I was very lucky in that respect. Never had to do maths, never had to do geometry or anything like that. And there was a gunny sack lying in our path. And the Mali with me, he came, kicked to the gunny sack. And a young dead man fell out, There was a lungi, I could see his navel, and below that, the lungi would end here, and then his hand was like that, and he was dead. And even at that young age, I thought, look at the futility of this handsome young life being wasted. It is so sad. Now this was the role assigned to Monsieur. And Rahul Khanna was Monsieur. And Rahul Khanna is about 6 feet tall. And they tried to fit him into a gunny sack. And they could not fit him. For 2 days they tried, and one day he came and said, "Monsieur, are you sure it was a gunny sack, ordinary gunny sack, gunny?" I said, "Yes, it was, ordinary jute sack." Eventually they found an extra large gunny sack, and they put him into that. And that is when I realized that my memory as a child had been at fault. What had happened was, obviously, the man's legs had been dismembered, and only his torso and the top of his body were there. So, you know, these little memories were woven into my story when I wrote Cracking India, I Scanty Man. At that time, only Kushwan Singh's Train to Pakistan had been written, and Tamas was being shown. Of course, we couldn't see that in Pakistan at that time. There was too little written about partition, and I felt this had to be written. And that is when I started to write whatever my memories were and whatever I realized as I grew up. Now I'll read you a little bit from here. Somebody will have to hold this because otherwise I won't be able to read. Essence of the book, really, and the essence of the partition in a way. Okay. There is much disturbing talk. India is going to be broken. Can one break a country? And what happens if they break it where our house is, or crack it further up on Forest Road? How will I get to Godmother's then? I ask. Cousin is asked everything. Ravishi says, no one's going to break India. It's not made of glass. I ask Aya. They'll dig a canal, she ventures, this side for Hindustan and this side for Pakistan. If they want 2 countries, that's what they'll have to do. Crack India with a long, long canal. Gandhi, Jinnah, Nehru, Tara Singh, Mountbatten are names I hear. And I become aware of religious differences. It is sudden. One day everybody's themselves, and the next day they are Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Christian. People shrink, dwindling into symbols. Aya is no longer just my all-encompassing Aya. She's also a token, a Hindu. Carried away by renewed devotional fervor, she expends a small fortune in joss sticks, flowers, and sweets on the gods and goddesses in the temples. Imam Din and Yusuf, turning into religious zealots, warn Mother they will take Friday afternoons off for the Jummah prayers. And you know, this is how it goes, how, every religious community is keeping to themselves. And suddenly, where everybody used to live at peace with each other, people didn't really bother about, they knew, everybody knew, Muslims don't do certain things, Hindus don't do certain things. And they respected their differences between each other. They didn't go deliberately to offend each other. And from childhood, I was told by my parents, never discuss religion. It was part of the ethos of that place. People existed happily side by side. And suddenly people began to become aware of, oh, he's a Muslim, he's a Hindu, oh, this is a Sikh, and we are all enemies. So this was the whole essence of that time. And, well, I think this is about all I can read at this point, because I don't have my real book with me. I just borrowed Mark's book. And if there are any questions, I'll be very happy to answer them. Oh.
Check. Thank you so much, ma'am. And now we'd appreciate if you have some questions to be put up. Anyone who has any questions to be asked. Any other book which is made into a film now? Any other book?
Well, this is a strange thing. Deepa Mehta wanted to make fire, earth and water. Earth, she called Cracking India, my book into, she called it Earth. And of course everybody said, "Humne Earth to dekhi hai." You know, nobody support it. Then she called it Earth 1947, a little difference. Then she tried to make the film Water, and there was a big attack on her in Banaras, apparently. You know, they burnt her effigies, and she was not allowed to make it in India at all. And she went and made it in Sri Lanka. And she made it in Sri Lanka, and she sent me the rough cut of the film and said, "Bamsi, please, I want you to turn it into a novel." And I said, "You know, I've never done something like that." And she said, "I want you to turn it into a novel because this is about religious, a certain sort of religious precepts, which, and this was meant for, you know, a foreign audience mostly. They won't understand unless, you know, why certain things happen is explained." And then she said, "You have to finish it in 4 months." I said, "How can I do that? It takes me 3 to 2 years to write a novel." She said, "No, I want you to time it with the release of the film." So she sent me Water, the rough edit, and I sat and I watched that film at least 120 times. And I started to write the story. And it turned into a really good novel. I'm surprised. Very, very seldom has a novel made from a movie worked, and this worked. What happened?
Thank you so much, sir.
So that is how I wrote the novel. And these were the 2 collaborations we had between each other.
I hope that answers your question. The name of the novel?
Water.
It's Water. Yeah.
Water.
I don't know of any other instance where a movie has been made into a book. And it might surprise you. Just this morning, William Carnival and, you know, the person who's writing the script for the film,
Yeah.
was asked this question that can we make a novel out of a film? And he said, "I don't think it's ever been done."
Well, then he doesn't know. He should talk to me. Actually, this is a novel which won the Primo Mandello Prize in Italy.
Right.
Yeah, this did very well.
In fact, I didn't connect the two.
Okay.
Thank you so much, ma'am. Is there any other questions? Yeah, there.
Is it common? Has it happened?
You can speak over the mic.
Yeah, is it common? Do you know of any other novel that was made out of film?
I believe one of these Odyssey type of books, you know, you know that fellow who writes about science fiction and voyages between different stars, Odyssey, man? Can you think of a name? Vonnegut, yes. I think one of his novels, he tried to, after the film was made, he tried to make a novel, but it didn't work. It very seldom works. It's not a very common occurrence.
Yes, ma'am. Yeah.
I've seen you said it was a prize-winning novel, so what is the name of the prize?
Sorry,
The Italian prize, that you said. You mentioned that the novel got an Italian prize.
She's asking your novel won an Italian prize. What was the name of the prize?
the Primo Mandello. It was one of the top awards in Italy.
In 1947 Earth, we were already wondering what happened to the Aya. I mean, what happened to her finally?
You see, if you read the book, Aya goes across, she sort of goes across to Amritsar. And I have left her alive, and Ice Candy Man, you know the Ice Candy Man's character changes also. He's been totally besotted and in love with her, and he follows her there. Now, this was not allowed to be put into the film, because I said, if I don't like the place where this book ends, with Aya being kidnapped, I would like it to continue to this point I brought it, and she tried. But a film is quite different from a talking, it's not a talking book. A book covers a much bigger expanse of time, a lot more incidents. It's a very different process altogether. And you can't compress this huge book into a 2-hour film, at the most 2 hours. So she had to cut out a lot of the very funny Parsi scenes also, which I missed. But that I could understand, because as she said, these people in, in Britain and America, where she showed the film in America, they didn't know who Hindus, Muslims and Sikhs were, let alone Parsis. Who the hell knows who Parsis are, So, a lot had to be cut, but she could not put the ending in. It was impossible. And that just couldn't be helped. That's the nature of the beast.
But she was kidnapped, and then he traced her to Amritsar. Aya was kidnapped, right?
No, Aya, you see, of course it's fiction, It's something I made up.
It's not autobiographical.
No.